International relations. It's a bit like a high school reunion, isn't it? You see people you once threw spitballs at, now you're exchanging pleasantries and pretending you were always the best of friends. Oh, Britain, lovely to see you. Remember that time you set my house on fire? Ha ha, water under the bridge. Literally, we had to use a lot of water. It's a beautiful, if slightly sociopathic, dance of diplomacy. Today we talk about America's closest allies, a term thrown around as if these bonds were forged in the eternal fires of Mount Doom. But the truth is, many of these relationships started less like a heartwarming buddy comedy and more like a violent, bloody divorce. The fickle hand of history has a truly wicked sense of humor. It takes sworn enemies, forces them into a geopolitical escape room, and doesn't let them out until they've signed a mutual defense treaty. The irony is thicker than a State Department briefing book. These unbreakable bonds we hear so much about are often built on the rubble of past conflicts, a testament to the fact that in global politics, shared interests are far more powerful than shared memories. It's a world where yesterday's nemesis is today's indispensable partner, and you just have to smile and nod when they bring up the good old days, hoping they don't mean good old days. So, let's peel back the layers of diplomatic niceties and look at the messy, complicated, and frankly hilarious origins of some of America's most cherished friendships. It's a story of grudges, warfare, and eventual begrudging cooperation. Let's take a look at some of the strangest U.S. alliances that started with open hostility. It's going to be an awkward but deeply informative family reunion. Let's start with the United Kingdom, America's closest confidant, its ride or die, the Watson to its Sherlock. The special relationship is a term that evokes images of Churchill and Roosevelt huddled together, or Reagan and Thatcher sharing a knowing glance. It's a bond so deep, so historically intertwined, that you'd think they were separated at birth, except of course for that rather messy birth which was less a separation and more a violent, protracted, and very bloody teenage rebellion. The American Revolution was, to put it mildly, an incredibly awkward breakup. And if the Revolution was the breakup, the War of 1812 was the part where your ex shows up at your new place and sets it on fire. Yes, let's talk about that. In 1814, British troops, in a move that can only be described as peak passive aggression, marched on Washington, D.C. and burned down the White House. They didn't just singe the curtains, they gutted the place. President James Madison had to flee, and his wife Dolly famously saved a portrait of George Washington, which is a lovely detail, but it slightly distracts from the main point. The British burned down the bloody White House. Imagine that today. Imagine the Prime Minister turning to the President at a G7 summit and saying, "So sorry about that whole arson thing. Bit of a tiff, wasn't it? Bygones." The sheer audacity is breathtaking. This wasn't a minor diplomatic incident, it was the symbolic heart of a new nation being turned to ash by its former colonial masters. It's the kind of historical baggage that would normally require centuries of international therapy to work through. You don't just casually move on from that. It's like finding out your spouse used to be an arsonist, and their target was your childhood home. Yet somehow they did move on. The embers of the White House cooled, and eventually, so did relations. Fast forward through a century of side eyes and cautious trade, and you get to the World Wars, where suddenly, these two were inseparable. The nation that once torched the president's home was now its most vital partner in saving the world from tyranny. The arsonist had become the firefighter, standing shoulder to shoulder with the person whose house they'd nearly leveled. That's not just a special relationship, it's a deeply weird one. And that weirdness continues today. The US and UK share intelligence so sensitive, it's practically pillow talk. They coordinate military operations and economic policy, as if the War of 1812 was just a hazy, drunken misunderstanding. It is the ultimate geopolitical glow-up, from bitter enemies engaged in property destruction to the world's most famous power couple. It's a beautiful story of forgiveness, unless you're an American history buff, in which case it's a constant, nagging reminder that your best friend once tried to burn you out of your own home. Alright, if the UK is the ex you eventually made friends with, Germany is the person who tried to murder you, your friends, and everyone on your street, then moved in next door and became the beloved head of the neighborhood watch. The transformation of the US-Germany relationship is less a story of reconciliation and more a plot twist, worthy of a particularly unhinged soap opera. Because let's be absolutely clear, for a significant chunk of the 20th century, Germany was America's arch-nemesis. World War II wasn't a squabble. It was a cataclysmic global struggle against an ideology of pure evil. The Nazis were not just an adversary, they were the movie villains of history, a regime responsible for unimaginable horror and systematic genocide. American GIs fought and died across Europe to defeat them. Cities were flattened, a continent was shattered, and the conflict was defined by a level of brutality that still shocks the conscience. The idea that these two nations could ever be friends would have seemed, in 1945, not just unlikely, but morally obscene, and yet here we are. The moment the war ended, the board was reset. Suddenly the big new threat was the Soviet Union, and the US needed a strong, stable ally in the heart of Europe. And who was sitting right there, smack in the middle of the new Cold War battlefield? A defeated, divided, and utterly broken Germany. So, America, in a stunning display of realpolitik, essentially said, right, forget all that unpleasantness from last week, we're best friends now. Here's a massive pile of money. It's called the Marshall Plan. Go build some Volkswagens. The shift was whiplash-inducing. The same German factories that had been churning out Panzers and Messerschmitts were now being rebuilt with American dollars to produce Beetles and machinery. West Germany became the linchpin of NATO, a bulwark against communism. American soldiers who had been fighting Germans were now stationed in Germany to protect them. It's a dark, cosmic joke. The country that had been the primary reason for the conflict became the primary beneficiary of the peace, all because a new, bigger enemy had appeared on the horizon. Today, Germany is one of America's most important partners. It's an economic powerhouse, a leader in the European Union, and a key NATO ally. The relationship is mature, stable, and deeply institutionalized. But you can't help but marvel at the sheer cold-blooded pragmatism of it all. It's a relationship born not of shared values in the 1940s, but of a shared terror of something else. It's a testament to the fact that in geopolitics, nothing patches up old wounds quite like pointing at a new guy and yelling, "Hey, look over there, he's even worse." Now let's talk about Japan. If the German turnaround was a stunning feat of political gymnastics, the US-Japan pivot is a gold medal performance in historical amnesia. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, plunging the United States into World War II. It was a day that, as Roosevelt famously said, would live in infamy. The ensuing Pacific War was one of the most savage conflicts in modern history, characterized by brutal island hopping, kamikaze attacks, and culminating in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The hatred between the two nations was profound and deeply personal. Propaganda on both sides depicted the enemy in monstrous, dehumanizing terms. This wasn't just a war between governments, it was a war that felt, to many, like a struggle for racial and cultural survival. The fighting was to the death, with no surrender being a guiding principle. To suggest in 1944 that Japan would one day be not just an ally, but America's most crucial strategic partner in Asia, would get you laughed out of the room, if not locked in a psychiatric ward. But then, the war ended. And just like with Germany, a new enemy, the looming threat of communism in China and the Soviet Union, changed the entire calculation. America, in its role as the occupying power, decided not to punish Japan, but to rebuild it. Under General Douglas MacArthur, the US essentially wrote Japan's new constitution, demilitarized the country, and then poured in aid to reconstruct its economy. It was a breathtakingly ambitious project of social engineering, turning a militaristic empire into a pacifist democracy in less than a decade. The result is one of the most bizarre and successful alliances in modern history. Japan, a nation constitutionally forbidden from waging war, hosts massive US military bases that are fundamental to American power in the Pacific. Its economy, rebuilt with American help, became a global titan, producing the cars and electronics that filled American homes. The country that attacked Pearl Harbor is now protected under the American nuclear umbrella, its security intrinsically linked to the very nation it once sought to cripple. The speed and totality of this transformation is almost unbelievable. It's like having a brutal, bloody fistfight with someone in an alley, and then the two of you dust yourselves off, shake hands, and agree to become lifelong business partners and roommates. The shift from Remember Pearl Harbor to Welcome to the G7 Summit is a masterclass in letting strategic necessity bulldoze historical animosity. Japan went from being the target of America's fury to the anchor of its entire Asian strategy, an indispensable ally forged in the ashes of total war. Our final example is perhaps the strangest of all, because the inciting incident didn't happen before the alliance was formed, but right in the middle of it. I'm talking about the US and Israel, and the bizarre, tragic, and still fiercely debated case of the USS Liberty. This isn't a story about ancient enemies becoming friends, it's a story about a friend inexplicably and brutally attacking another friend, and the friendship somehow, impossibly, becoming even stronger. It is the political equivalent of getting shot by your best man at your wedding, and then sending him a thank you card. Here are the facts, and they are grim. On June 8, 1967, during the Six-Day War, the USS Liberty, an American intelligence ship sailing in international waters off the Sinai Peninsula, was relentlessly attacked by Israeli fighter jets and torpedo boats. The assault was not a glancing blow, it was a sustained, 2-hour attack. Israeli forces strafed the deck, dropped napalm, and fired torpedoes. The ship was riddled with over 800 holes, a torpedo blew a 40-foot gash in its side, and by the time it was over, 34 American crewmen were dead and 171 were wounded. Israel's official explanation, then and now, is that it was a tragic case of mistaken identity. They claimed they thought the Liberty was an Egyptian ship. However, survivors from the Liberty, as well as high-ranking U.S. officials at the time, have vehemently disputed this for decades. They point out the ship was flying a large American flag, had clear U.S. Navy markings, and the attack continued for hours, even after the ship's identity should have been blindingly obvious. To them, the mistake explanation is, to put it charitably, completely implausible. You would think an incident like this would shatter a relationship. There would be congressional inquiries, sanctions, a full-blown diplomatic crisis. At minimum, you'd expect a very, very long and awkward silence. But that's not what happened. The Johnson administration, desperate to avoid complicating the regional situation, essentially accepted the Israeli apology and quietly swept the whole thing under the rug. The official inquiry was shockingly brief, and the story faded from public view. And what happened to the alliance? It didn't just survive, it thrived. In the years following the attack on the Liberty, U.S. aid to Israel skyrocketed, and the strategic partnership deepened into the unbreakable bond we hear about today. It is a truly baffling outcome. The relationship proved to be resilient to an event that would have been a declaration of war under almost any other circumstances. It demonstrates that some alliances are so geopolitically essential, so strategically vital, that they can withstand even the most shocking and painful friendly fire incidents. It's a peculiar, and for the survivors of the USS Liberty, a deeply frustrating chapter in the history of international friendships. So there you have it, a rogues gallery of America's best friends, many of whom started out as its worst enemies. From the British burning down the White House, to Germany trying to conquer the world, to Japan attacking Pearl Harbor, these special relationships were forged in the crucible of conflict. It's a history that's less about unwavering loyalty and more about convenient timing and a shared fear of whoever the new boogeyman is. It's a reminder that the sturdy foundation of modern diplomacy is often just a layer of concrete poured over a mass grave of old grudges. These stories aren't just historical trivia, they're a crucial lesson in how the world actually works. Alliances are not marriages, they are contracts, subject to renegotiation when circumstances change. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, but only until a more threatening enemy or a more convenient friend comes along. The international stage is less a chessboard and more a game of musical chairs, where the music is a constant barrage of crises, and everyone is desperately scrambling for a partner before the tune stops. So, next time you hear a politician talk about unbreakable alliances and eternal friendships, just take it with a grain of salt and a healthy dose of historical perspective. Remember the ashes of the White House, the battlefields of Europe, and the wreckage in Pearl Harbor? History's best friends often started as the worst of enemies. In geopolitics, the script is always up for a rewrite, and frankly, that makes the whole chaotic drama infinitely more interesting to watch.